Have you ever stood at the edge of a lake at night? The surface lies calm, perfectly still, reflecting the moonlight like glass. And yet, you cannot shake the feeling that something stirs beneath. A ripple where there should be none, a shadow moving just below the surface. That feeling, the chill on your skin, the instinct to step back from the water's edge, is as old as humanity itself. We are drawn to water for life, but we also fear what lies beneath it. Rivers, lakes, seas, they are mirrors of our unconscious, vast and unfathomable. And somewhere in that darkness, we imagine eyes watching us. For the people of the Scottish Highlands, that unease crystallized into a legend. In the misty waters of Loch Ness, a creature has haunted imaginations for centuries. Some call her Nessie, some call her a monster, others a myth. But whatever the name, the image endures. A long neck rising from the water, a shadow gliding beneath the surface, a ripple that suggests something vast, hidden, and alive. The question is not only does the Loch Ness Monster exist, the deeper question is, why do we need her to exist? The first written ripple. The first mention of a monster in Loch Ness dates back to the 6th century. The Irish monk Saint Columba, in 565 AD, wrote of a terrifying encounter near the River Ness. According to the tale, locals were burying a man who had been mauled by a water beast. When another man attempted to swim across, the beast surfaced again. Columba raised his hand, invoked the name of God, and commanded the creature to retreat. And it did. This was not yet Nessie as we imagine her, but the seed was planted. A beast in the waters, older than Christianity in Scotland, lingering in the collective memory. For centuries afterward, locals spoke of strange shapes in the loch, of ripples with no cause, of shadows moving under the water. These whispers blended with the folklore of the Highlands. The kelpie, a shape-shifting water spirit said to lure travelers to their doom, and the Uisge, the water horse that dragged riders into the depths. Loch Ness was already haunted long before the modern monster appeared. The silence before the storm. And then, for hundreds of years, the story quieted. The monster waited beneath the surface, unseen by the wider world, until the 20th century, an age of cars, newspapers, and cameras, when the legend exploded. But before we get to that, pause for a moment. Picture the loch itself, 23 miles long, over 750 feet deep, holding more water than all the lakes of England and Wales combined. Its waters are dark, almost black, stained with peat from the surrounding hills. Visibility is poor. Even on a clear day, you cannot see far beneath the surface. It is a perfect canvas for the imagination, a place where anything could be hiding. And this is where myth takes root, not only in what is seen, but in what cannot be seen. The monster becomes the answer to a silence too vast to comprehend. The eternal ripple. Whether the Loch Ness Monster is real or not almost becomes secondary, because something is real, the feeling, the unease at the water's edge, the stories passed down, the thousands of people who, across centuries, swore they saw something move in the mist. The first ripple is not a photograph, it is not a sonar reading, it is not even Saint Columba's chronicle. The first ripple is that ancient feeling, that universal truth. Beneath the surface of life, something stirs, and we do not know what it is. That is where our story begins, not with proof, but with possibility, not with certainty, but with shadow. The monster waits in the water, and whether we believe in her or not, she has already taken root in us. Every legend has roots. Before the Loch Ness Monster became Nessie, before blurry photographs and sonar readings, before tourist boats with binoculars lined the loch, there were whispers, ancient stories that spoke of something lurking in the deep. The earliest written account of a creature in the River Ness comes from the life of Saint Columba, written by Adomnan around the year 700, describing events from 565 AD. According to the text, Columba, an Irish missionary, encountered locals burying a man killed by a water beast. The monster had mauled him while he was swimming in the river that flows from Loch Ness. Later, another man attempted to swim across. The beast surfaced, rushing toward him. At that moment, Columba raised his hand, invoked the name of Christ, and commanded the monster to stop. The beast froze mid-charge, as if pulled back with ropes, and fled. To the Christian chroniclers, this was proof of divine power. To the locals, it was confirmation of what they already knew. The waters were not safe. Something lived there. Though this story is often dismissed as hagiography, legend designed to glorify a saint, it left a mark. It established an ancient link between Loch Ness and a creature of the deep, a shadow older than modern tourism, older than photography, older even than Scotland itself. But Columba's story was not unique. Across the Highlands, water was always seen as haunted. Streams, lochs, and rivers were believed to house kelpies, shape-shifting water spirits. Often they took the form of horses, beautiful and inviting. Children and travelers who climbed upon them were dragged beneath the surface, never to return. At Loch Ness, the darker version was the Ichwishge, the water horse. Unlike kelpies who stayed near rivers, the Ichwishge lived in deep lochs and sea inlets. It could appear as a horse, a handsome man, or a strange creature with slick skin. Those who trusted it ended up drowned, their livers washing ashore as grim reminders. These myths were not mere superstition, they were cultural survival tools. They warned children not to wander too close to the water, not to trust strangers near the loch, not to underestimate the power of nature. Beneath the fantasy was a practical truth. Water kills. It is beautiful, necessary, and deadly. Beyond horses, there were also whispers of serpents. Ancient Highland tales spoke of lochs with water worms, serpentine beasts that slithered beneath the surface. Norse influence brought the imagery of the Midgard serpent, while Celtic myths told of dragons in lakes and rivers. Loch Ness, long, deep and dark, was a natural home for such imaginations. Standing on its banks, you can almost feel it, the sense of something vast, unseen, curling beneath the waves. By the Middle Ages, maps of Scotland occasionally depicted fantastical creatures in the lochs. Though Loch Ness itself was rarely singled out, the idea that something inhabited the waters of the Highlands was already widespread. Travelers' journals mention strange creatures seen in rivers and lakes, though the descriptions vary wildly. One thread remains constant: fear of depth. Shallow waters could be crossed, fish trusted. Deep waters were something else. The darker the loch, the deeper the myth. And Loch Ness, with its inky, peat-stained water, was among the darkest of all. Skeptics often argue that Nessie is a modern invention, a hoax of the 1930s. And in one sense, they are right. The monster, as we know her today, was popularized in that era. But the soil for that myth had been fertilized for centuries. Long before cameras, long before newspapers, the people of the Highlands told each other, "Beware the water." Long before tourist shops sold Nessie keychains, mothers told their children, "Do not stray to the loch's edge." Long before skeptics debated plesiosaurs, saints and storytellers whispered, "Something waits beneath the surface." These stories remind us that myth is never created from nothing. It grows from the landscape, from the psychology of fear and wonder, from the need to explain what cannot be seen. Loch Ness was always a mirror of the unknown. Nessie is simply its most famous reflection. Imagine this. A villager in the 12th century walking home at dusk sees a ripple break the calm of Loch Ness. No wind, no boat, just a sudden swell as if something massive turned beneath the water. There are no cameras, no sonar, only the human mind and its hunger for meaning. He tells his family, his children tell theirs. The story travels through generations, blending with kelpie tales, saintly chronicles, and serpent myths. By the time the 20th century arrives, the groundwork has been laid. The monster is already alive in the collective imagination, and this is how myths endure. They may change names, shapes, and details, but their core survives. Nessie is not new. She is the heir of every waterhorse, every kelpie, every serpent whispered about in Highland nights. She is the shadow beneath the water, reborn for each generation. For centuries, Loch Ness whispered with myth, but it was in the 20th century that the whisper became a roar. The Loch Ness Monster, once a shadow of folklore, became a global phenomenon, thanks not to saints or shamans, but to the power of modern media. The year was 1933. The road along the northern shore of Loch Ness had just been completed, opening the loch to more travelers than ever before. With cars came eyes, and with eyes came stories. On April 14, 1933, local couple John and Aldi Mackay reported seeing an enormous creature rolling and plunging in the loch. Aldi described it as a whale-like beast, splashing before disappearing beneath the waves. Their account was published in the Inverness Courier, a small local newspaper. But the language of the editor made all the difference. He called it a monster, and with that single word, the modern legend was born. Within weeks, other sightings were reported. Cars stopped along the new road. People scanned the waters with binoculars. Locals claimed they had seen something for years, but now, with the world watching, they began to speak more openly. In August 1933, a motorcyclist named George Spicer and his wife described seeing a dragon-like creature cross the road in front of them and slip into the loch. According to Spicer, it was about 25 feet long, with a long neck and bulky body. This account, dramatic and vivid, was splashed across British newspapers. Later that year, a veterinary student named Arthur Grant claimed to have nearly collided with the beast on his motorcycle. He even drew sketches of a long-necked animal resembling a prehistoric plesiosaur. The stage was set. Nessie was no longer a whisper. It was front-page news. With stories came the demand for evidence. And in December 1933, Hugh Gray, a local man, captured a blurry photograph of something in the water. The image showed a vague serpentine shape, so vague that skeptics argued it was nothing more than a dog swimming with a stick in its mouth. But to a world hungry for mystery, it was enough. Soon others followed. Binoculars, cameras, and curiosity gathered at Loch Ness. For the first time in history, folklore was colliding with technology. The monster was no longer a tale, it was a possibility. But why 1933? Why did the legend explode at this exact moment? The answer lies in the mood of the time. The Great Depression had cast a shadow over Britain and the world. People were desperate for distraction, for hope, for a story that reminded them there were still mysteries left in the world. In an era of hardship, the idea that a prehistoric creature might lurk in the Highlands captured imaginations everywhere. Scotland, too, found in Nessie a source of pride and identity. The Highlands, often seen as remote and harsh, suddenly became the center of global fascination. Tourists arrived, curious eyes turned north, and the loch began its transformation from quiet landscape to mythic stage. Before 1933, the waters of Loch Ness were feared, respected, and whispered about. After 1933, they were legendary. The shift was subtle but profound. A word in a newspaper, a handful of sightings, a blurry photograph. And the monster was reborn, this time not as a kelpie or waterhorse, but as a global icon. The monster had crossed the threshold from myth to media. And once a story enters the modern imagination, it is almost impossible to kill. Imagine standing on the loch's shore in 1933, reading the Courier, hearing locals whisper of sightings. The mist hangs low, the water ripples strangely, and you ask yourself, what if? That question, what if, is the lifeblood of myth. It is the gap between certainty and wonder, the space where belief takes root. Nessie thrives not in proof, but in possibility. And in 1933, the world decided it wanted to believe. What began with John and Aldi Mackay became a cascade. The Spicer's dragon, Arthur Grant's sketch, Hugh Gray's photograph, each added fuel. Newspapers outside Scotland picked up the story. Soon London, then Europe, then America were captivated. The Loch Ness Monster was no longer just a Highland legend. It was a global obsession. And with the hunger for proof came the next great leap in the story, the most famous photograph of them all, the Surgeon S photo of 1934. But before we examine that picture, that supposed piece of undeniable evidence, we must understand something vital. The legend did not begin with proof, it began with belief. In the spring of 1934, the Loch Ness Monster made the leap from rumor to icon. The transformation came not from a sighting, not from a whispered tale, but from a photograph. Grainy, black and white, and destined to become one of the most famous images in the history of cryptozoology. On April 21, 1934, a photograph was published in the Daily Mail. It showed a dark, slender neck rising from the surface of Loch Ness, curving like a serpent, with a small head poised above the rippling water. The image was credited to Colonel Robert Kenneth Wilson, a respected London surgeon. Wilson claimed he had been driving along the loch when he noticed something moving. Pulling over, he snapped several photos with his camera. Only 2 developed clearly. He handed them to the press, refusing to allow his name to be directly tied to the story. This reluctance only added credibility. If a man of science and reputation saw something, surely it must be real. And with that, Nessie had her portrait. Until then, Nessie had been a shadow, a rumor, a ripple. But the surgeon's photo gave her a face. Newspapers across Britain, and soon the world, reprinted the image. It became proof for the believers, a banner for the legend. Think about the timing. In 1934, the world was in the grip of depression, modernity was accelerating, and ancient mysteries seemed to be vanishing under the march of science. And then this, a photograph that suggested a prehistoric survivor still haunted the misty Highlands. The possibility that the Age of Wonder was not dead after all. The photo carried all the power of modern media. Where once myths spread through campfire tales and village gossip, Nessie now spread through ink and newsprint, reaching millions in days. The decades that followed saw Loch Ness transformed. Tourists flocked to the Highlands, scanning the waters with binoculars. Journalists camped on the shores. Expeditions were launched with cameras, sonar, and boats. In the 1930s and 40s, sightings multiplied. Each ripple became a headline, each shadow became a possibility. The loch was no longer just a lake, it was a stage, and the world was watching. Nessie seeped into popular culture. She appeared in cartoons, travel posters, and children's books. She became a symbol of Scotland itself, mysterious, proud, untamed. Economically, the monster was a boon, drawing tourists and fueling a cottage industry of hotels, restaurants, and souvenirs. Spiritually, Nessie became a reminder that mystery had not died, even in the age of electricity and airplanes. Of course, not everyone was convinced. From the beginning, some questioned the surgeon's photo. The image was grainy, indistinct. Could it not have been a bird, a log, a wave? The Daily Mail itself, ironically, had commissioned monster hunters only a year earlier, who found nothing but hoaxes. Still, the photo endured. For decades, it was reproduced in books, magazines, and documentaries as the definitive proof that Nessie existed. Then, in the 1990s, over half a century later, the truth surfaced. In 1994, an investigation revealed that the surgeon's photo had been a hoax. The story was this. In 1933, the Daily Mail had hired a big-game hunter, Marmaduke Wetherell, to track Nessie. He found tracks along the shore and proudly announced the monster was real. But experts soon discovered the tracks had been made with a hippo-foot umbrella stand. Humiliated, Wetherell vowed revenge. With the help of his stepson, Ian Marmaduke, and model maker Christian Sperling, Wetherill built a small model of a serpent's neck and head mounted on a toy submarine. They placed it in the loch, photographed it, and handed the film to Colonel Wilson, who agreed to lend his reputation while distancing himself from the details. The hoax worked better than they could have dreamed. The world believed for 60 years. And yet, here is the fascinating part. Even after the hoax was revealed, the legend did not die. The surgeon's photo may have been fake, but the myth had already taken root too deeply. By the 1990s, Nessie was more than a photo. She was a cultural icon, a global mystery, a beloved legend. This tells us something profound. Myths do not depend on proof. They depend on belief. The photograph was not evidence. It was a symbol. It crystallized the hope that mystery still lingered in the modern world. When the photo was debunked, that hope did not vanish, because Nessie had become more than an image. She had become part of us. So we return to the eternal paradox. Do people truly believe in Nessie, or do they simply want to? Does it matter if she exists, when her presence in culture, imagination, and economy is undeniable? The surgeon's photo may have been a fraud, but the legend it fueled was real. And in myth, the truth of the story often matters less than the truth it reveals about us. The 1930s gave Nessie her face. The decades after gave her a kingdom. But the search for proof would only intensify. If photographs could deceive, then science would be called upon to deliver answers. And in the second half of the 20th century, sonar, submarines, and cameras would descend into the depths of Loch Ness, chasing a shadow that always slipped away. For centuries, belief in the Loch Ness Monster rested on stories, sketches, and photographs, many of them blurry, some of them hoaxes. But by the mid-20th century, a new age was dawning. If Nessie existed, science would find her. The loch, 23 miles long and over 750 feet deep, became the target of expeditions armed with sonar, submarines, and cameras. The hunt for Nessie transformed from folklore into one of the longest-running scientific pursuits of the modern era. In the early 1960s, interest in Nessie surged again. Technology had advanced after World War II, and scientists were eager to apply sonar to the mystery. In 1962, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, LNPIB, was founded, drawing volunteers, scientists, and enthusiasts from around the world. Armed with cameras and sonar devices, they set up observation posts around the loch. In 1968, a major sonar sweep detected what seemed to be a large moving object deep in the water. The signals showed something massive, larger than a typical fish, rising and falling in the depths. Newspapers across Britain exploded with headlines, "Nessie found." But the data was inconclusive. Sonar can pick up schools of fish, drifting logs, or thermal layers of water. The shadow remained a shadow. The 1970s saw even more ambitious attempts. The LNPB partnered with the Academy of Applied Science from Boston. In 1972, they dropped cameras deep into the loch, triggered by sonar. One photograph, taken that year, appeared to show a flipper-like object, resembling that of a plesiosaur. The image electrified the world. Magazines ran it as proof. For believers, this was the smoking gun. But once again, the excitement faded. Later analysis revealed the image was grainy, indistinct, possibly showing nothing more than silt or debris stirred by currents. The flipper could not be confirmed. Still, the seed was planted. Maybe, just maybe, Nessie was a prehistoric survivor, a relic of the Jurassic Age. In 1969 and 1970, small submarines were used to explore Loch Ness. Pilots reported strange sonar echoes and murky shapes, but visibility in the peaty waters was almost zero. Cameras recorded only a haze of particles drifting like snow in the dark. The problem was simple. Loch Ness is a difficult place to search. Its depth, darkness, and sheer size make it almost impossible to scan in full. The loch is long, narrow, and lined with steep walls. If a creature wanted to hide, it could. The climax of scientific hunts came in 1987 with Operation Deep Scan. For the first time, a full-scale sonar sweep was attempted. 24 boats lined up across the loch, each equipped with advanced sonar, moving in formation from one end to the other. It was the largest search in Loch Ness history. The results: several large, unexplained contacts were detected. Some were dismissed as schools of fish or debris. Others, however, seemed to move independently, too large to be ordinary. The press reported, "Nessie lives?" Scientists remained cautious. The data proved there were big things in the loch, but not what they were. The mystery endured. By the early 2000s, with improved sonar and scanning technology, skeptics pushed for a definitive answer. In 2003, the BBC funded the most comprehensive search ever. Using 600 separate sonar beams and satellite tracking, they swept the entire loch. The conclusion was blunt: no monster was found. If a large creature lived in Loch Ness, they argued, it would have been detected. For many, this was the death of the Nessie legend. For others, it was just another twist. After all, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The most recent chapter came in 2018, when scientists conducted an environmental DNA survey of Loch Ness. By collecting water samples from multiple depths, they analyzed genetic traces of every species in the loch. The results revealed eels, fish, and other known species, but no DNA of prehistoric reptiles, giant unknown creatures, or anything unusual. The only surprise? The sheer volume of eel DNA. Could Nessie simply be a giant eel, seen in glimpses and magnified by imagination? Some scientists suggested the theory, while others dismissed it. Still, the conclusion was clear. There was no genetic evidence of a monster, and yet the legend did not die. Despite decades of sonar sweeps, submarine dives, BBC documentaries, and DNA studies, belief in Nessie persists. Why? Because science can measure the water, but it cannot measure the human need for mystery. Each inconclusive sonar ping, each blurry photograph, each ripple without explanation, only adds fuel. Skeptics call it wishful thinking. Believers call it proof that the mystery endures. The more we search, the more elusive Nessie becomes. Each expedition strips away possibilities. No plesiosaur, no giant reptile, no dinosaur in the deep. And yet, the monster survives, not in sonar images or DNA, but in imagination. Science can tell us what is not in the loch, but it cannot erase the feeling of standing on the shore at dusk, watching the black water and sensing that something moves beneath. Operation Deep Scan, the BBC sweeps, the DNA tests, they all deepen the paradox. The more proof we demand, the more we realize the monster is not about proof at all. Nessie lives where proof cannot reach, in the space between evidence and wonder. Long before the name Nessie appeared in print, long before cameras tried to capture her shadow, humanity was already haunted by creatures of the deep. The Loch Ness Monster is not an isolated legend. It is the latest face of an archetype as old as storytelling itself, the monster that dwells in water. In Jungian psychology, water is the oldest symbol of the unconscious. Rivers, lakes, and seas represent the parts of ourselves we cannot fully see, vast, hidden, mysterious. And what lives in those depths? Monsters, shadows, archetypes of what we fear and repress. This is why so many cultures have placed creatures in the water. They are not only about the danger of drowning or the mystery of the sea, they are metaphors for the darkness within. The Loch Ness Monster belongs to this lineage. She is not only a Scottish curiosity, she is the modern heir of humanity's most primal archetypes. All over the world, sea serpents have slithered through myth. Norsemen spoke of Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, so vast it encircled the earth. In the Bible, the Leviathan lurked in the depths, a beast of chaos opposed to creation. Ancient sailors from Greece to China described long, sinuous creatures rising from the sea, coiling around ships, dragging them under. These serpents were not merely zoological speculation. They embodied chaos. They symbolized the vastness of the unknown ocean, the sense that something incomprehensible lay beneath. Nessie, often described with a long neck and serpent-like body, fits perfectly into this archetype. When witnesses describe her rolling through the waves, what they are really describing is the eternal fear of the serpent that hides in the depths of the unconscious. From Norse legend also comes the kraken, the giant cephalopod that could drag entire ships beneath the sea. Sailors spoke of tentacles wrapping around masts, of whirlpools created by its movement. Though likely inspired by real giant squids, the kraken grew into something more, a mythic force of the sea's hostility. Loch Ness, though a lake, borrows the same psychological stage. When we imagine Nessie rising from the loch, we imagine the same dread sailors felt when the sea itself seemed alive. In Celtic and Slavic tradition, serpentine dragons lived in rivers and lakes. The Slavs told of the Zmij, a dragon serpent that could breathe fire or poison, often living in water or guarding springs. In Welsh legend, the red and white dragons fought beneath a lake, symbols of chaos and conflict. These dragons were rarely random beasts. They symbolized disruption, imbalance, forces that demanded respect. Loch Ness' darkness is the same stage where such archetypes dwell. Water as a threshold to otherworldly power. Closer to Nessie's home, Highland folklore offered the kelpie and the wish, water horses luring humans to death. These spirits were not lumbering reptiles, but shapeshifters, sometimes appearing human, sometimes beast. Their lesson was the same: the water conceals what cannot be trusted. Nessie inherits this mantle. Though usually imagined as reptilian, her true power lies not in her shape, but in her ambiguity. She is whatever the human mind projects into the mist. When you place these myths side by side, a pattern emerges. Serpents that encircle or rise from the water, Jörmungandr, Leviathan. Beasts of chaos that disrupt human order, kraken, dragons. Spirits that lure and deceive, kelpies, water horses. Nessie is all of these at once. She slithers like a serpent, emerges like a dragon, deceives like a spirit. She condenses into one figure the entire archetypal history of aquatic monsters. This is why her legend feels so natural, so believable, even without proof. Our psyches are already primed to believe in her. She is the shadow that water has always carried. What then is Nessie's archetypal role? She is the unknown that cannot be mapped, the shadow that will not stay buried. The reminder that no matter how advanced our science, how many sonar sweeps or DNA tests we run, there are parts of existence we cannot fully master. To stand by Loch Ness and imagine a ripple becoming a neck is to feel the same awe that sailors felt in storms, that peasants felt by rivers, that prophets felt when speaking of Leviathan. It is to touch the archetype of the deep. In our modern world, we often tell ourselves that the age of myth is over, that science has mapped every land, photographed every species, explained every mystery. And yet, Nessie endures. Why? Because the archetype endures. Because no matter how many submarines we send, we still dream of the serpent in the deep. Because the unconscious is not banished by data. Nessie is not only a monster in a lake. She is the serpent of Midgard reborn, the Leviathan resurfacing, the Zmij slithering through our collective unconscious. She is proof not of zoology, but of psychology. We will always need monsters to swim in the waters of our imagination. Not every monster becomes a myth, and not every myth becomes a cultural icon, but Nessie did. What began as a ripple in Loch Ness became an economic engine, a tourist attraction, a mascot, and even a symbol of Scottish identity. The Loch Ness Monster is not only a creature of folklore, it is an empire. By the late 1930s, only a few years after the Mackay's sighting and the famous surgeon's photo, Loch Ness was already attracting visitors. Curious travelers came by train, bus and car, hoping for a glimpse of the monster. Hotels filled. Restaurants advertised monster viewing spots. After World War II, the boom exploded. With the rise of affordable car travel, families from across Britain and soon from Europe and America flocked to the Highlands. By the 1960s, monster hunting had become an entire industry. Boats offered tours across the loch. Shops sold postcards, binoculars and monster toys. Today, Nessie tourism is worth an estimated $30 million a year to the Scottish economy. Thousands of people visit annually, not just to see the loch, but to stand on its shore and wonder. Even skeptics buy the t-shirts. In the village of Drumnadrochit, two rival visitor centres, both dedicated to the Loch Ness Monster, compete for tourists. Exhibits display photographs, sonar scans, newspaper clippings, and even life-sized models of Nessie. The creature has become part museum, part carnival, part pilgrimage. There are Nessie cruises, Nessie hotels, Nessie souvenirs ranging from mugs to whiskey bottles. For many visitors, it doesn't matter whether the monster exists. The point is to be part of the legend, to look at the loch and think maybe. Hollywood could not resist Nessie. She has appeared in countless documentaries, mockumentaries and films. From serious BBC specials to children's cartoons, from horror movies to comedies, Nessie has played every role. Terrifying beast, gentle giant, mysterious shadow. In 1970, Hammer Films released The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, featuring a mechanical monster in Loch Ness. In 1996, the family film Loch Ness starred Ted Danson as a skeptical scientist who comes to believe. Animated versions, like The Family Ness, reimagined her as a lovable character for children. Even Doctor Who had its Loch Ness Monster episode. The variety is striking. Nessie is not locked into a single identity. She is both threat and friend, horror and humor, monster and mascot. That flexibility is part of her cultural power. Few myths become brands, but Nessie has. She appears on whiskey bottles, shortbread tins, tartan scarves, even bank logos. She is a marketing icon, a shorthand for Scotland itself, mysterious, rugged, untamed, and proud of its legends. For Scots, Nessie has become more than folklore. She is part of cultural identity, just as the dragon represents Wales and the unicorn represents purity in Scottish heraldry. Nessie represents the enduring mystery of the Highlands. She is both playful and profound. From the Inverness Courier in 1933 to viral YouTube videos in the 21st century, Nessie has always thrived in the media. Each new photo or blurry video sparks headlines worldwide. News outlets that would never cover local folklore in other contexts eagerly publish, "Has Nessie been found again?" Why? Because Nessie sells. She's a story people want to hear. She invites curiosity without demanding belief. Unlike UFOs or conspiracies, Nessie is rarely polarizing. She exists in the sweet spot of myth, serious enough to wonder about, playful enough to enjoy. In a way, Nessie is Scotland's greatest ambassador. Tourists visit for castles, whiskey and Highland scenery, but Nessie gives the trip an extra shimmer of magic. She is the what-if that sets the landscape apart. This is what scholars call soft power, the ability of a culture to influence the world through symbols, stories, and imagination. Nessie is part of Scotland's soft power. She turns a remote lake into a world stage. At some level, Nessie survives because she is fun. Children love her, tourists love her, even skeptics enjoy debating her. The Loch Ness Monster sits at the intersection of folklore, entertainment, and economy. She thrives not because of proof, but because she is useful to storytellers, to businesses, to tourists, to Scotland itself. And yet, beneath the plush toys and postcards, something older lingers. Nessie is still a shadow in the water, still an echo of the kelpie, still the archetypal serpent in the deep. She may sell t-shirts, but she also stirs something primal in us. That is the paradox of pop culture. It can cheapen myth, but it also keeps it alive. So what is Nessie in pop culture? A mascot? A joke? A brand? Yes, but she is also something more. She is proof that myth can survive modernization, commercialization, even debunking. She shows us that humans will always hunger for stories, and we will gladly buy them, wear them, and pass them down. Nessie is a paradox, both ancient and modern, both sacred and commercial, both joke and archetype. And that paradox is exactly why she endures. Every great legend attracts three kinds of people: the storytellers, the skeptics, and the believers. The Loch Ness Monster is no exception. For nearly a century, she has been the subject of hoaxes, investigations, and unshakable faith. And in that tension, Nessie's true cultural power is revealed. The most famous deception is, of course, the surgeon's photo of 1934, a toy submarine with a crafted neck and head, staged by Marmaduke Wetherell and exposed as a hoax 60 years later. But it was far from the only one. The hippo foot tracks, 1933. Hired by the Daily Mail, Wetherell proudly reported finding huge tracks by the loch's shore. When plaster casts were examined, scientists discovered they had been made with a stuffed hippopotamus foot, likely from an umbrella stand. The Italian hoax, 1951. A man named Lachlan Stewart photographed 3 humps rising from the water. Decades later, it was revealed he had used hay bales covered with tarpaulins. The fake fins, 1972. The Academy of Applied Science released a photo of a plesiosaur-like flipper. Later analysis revealed it had been retouched to look more dramatic than the original image. The computer hoaxes, 2000s. With the rise of Photoshop, new sightings circulated online, some so obviously fake that they became part of Nessie's humor. The hoaxes range from playful pranks to deliberate frauds, but they all point to the same truth. The legend is so powerful that people want to make it real, even if only for a moment. Scientists and skeptics have long dismissed Nessie as a combination of hoaxes, misidentifications, and wishful thinking. Floating debris, logs, driftwood, or peat gas bubbles rising from the loch can look like moving shapes. Waves and wakes. The long, narrow loch creates unusual wave patterns. A boat passing miles away can send ripples that look like humps. Animals, seals, eels, and even swimming deer have all been mistaken for monsters. Large sturgeon with their prehistoric appearance are also candidates. Optical illusions. The loch's dark, reflective waters play tricks on the eyes, especially in mist or twilight. For skeptics, Nessie is not a mystery of nature, but of psychology. We see what we want to see. We turn ripples into monsters, shadows into serpents. And yet, despite hoaxes, despite scientific dismissal, the believers remain. Thousands of people, from locals to tourists, have sworn they saw something they cannot explain. In 1960, a local aeronautical engineer named Tim Dinsdale filmed a dark object crossing the loch. Experts at the time declared it mechanical. Later analysis suggested it was not a boat, but a living creature. To this day, some consider it the most compelling piece of Nessie evidence. Ordinary people, teachers, police officers, children, have described long necks rising from the water, humps rolling in the waves, eyes glinting in the mist. They are not all pranksters or fame seekers. Many describe their sightings with awe, even fear, and with no desire for publicity. This persistence is telling. Hoaxes can be explained. Science can be applied. But the feeling, the conviction of witnesses remains stubbornly alive. Why do people keep believing? Because belief in Nessie is not just about evidence. It is about identity, mystery, and hope. To believe is to participate in something larger than yourself, a tradition, a legend, a question that has endured for centuries. Skeptics say belief persists because people are gullible, but another interpretation is possible. Belief persists because humans need mystery. In a world where satellites map every inch of the globe, Nessie is one of the few shadows left. The relationship between hoaxes, skeptics, and believers is paradoxical. Each hoax fuels skepticism, but also keeps Nessie in the news. Each skeptical debunking sparks defiance, strengthening the faith of true believers. Each sighting, no matter how vague, rekindles the fire. In this way, the legend thrives, not despite the conflict, but because of it. The tension between doubt and faith is the lifeblood of myth. At some level, the question, does Nessie exist, may be the wrong one. The real question is, why does Nessie exist in us? Why, despite every exposure of fraud, every sonar sweep, every DNA test, do we keep looking at the loch with wonder? The answer is that belief is not about proof. Belief is about meaning. For some, Nessie is proof that the world is still mysterious. For others, she is a story to tell children, a joke to share with friends, a symbol of home. True or false, Nessie is real where it matters most, in culture, in imagination, in identity. Stand by Loch Ness today and you will find them, the watchers. People with binoculars, cameras, flasks of tea, waiting for a ripple. They know the hoaxes. They have read the debunkings, but still they wait, because to see Nessie even once would be to touch the unknown. And that desire for contact with the mystery is something no photograph, no sonar, no scientist can erase. What if the Loch Ness Monster was never about the loch at all? What if she has always been about us? Because when you look closely, the legend of Nessie does not simply describe a creature in the water. It describes the way we live with our fears, our hopes, and the shadows we carry within. Psychology tells us that water is one of the most universal symbols of the unconscious. What is hidden beneath the surface, what we cannot see or control, becomes the place where monsters are imagined. Standing at the shore of Loch Ness, you cannot see the bottom. The dark water is opaque, impenetrable. It feels endless. This mirrors the way we experience our own inner lives. We see only the surface of ourselves, our habits, our roles, our daily routines. But beneath lies something deeper, fears, wounds, desires we rarely acknowledge. Nessie, then, is not just a legend of a creature. She is the shadow of the unconscious, the monster we sense but cannot define. But why do we give that shadow the form of a monster? Because monsters are metaphors for what we fear and repress. They give shape to the formless. Instead of admitting, "I am afraid of the unknown," we say, "There is a beast in the water." Instead of confronting grief or chaos, we project it outward as a serpent, a dragon, a kelpie. The Loch Ness Monster is the modern form of this ancient process. She is the darkness made visible. In Jungian terms, Nessie is an archetype, the hidden beast. Every culture has one. For the Greeks, it was Scylla and Charybdis, lurking in the straits. For the Norse, it was Jörmungandr, the world serpent beneath the sea. For the Hebrews, it was Leviathan. In Scotland, it is Nessie. Not because the Highlands are unique, but because every culture projects its fear of the unknown into the water. Nessie is simply the latest mask worn by the same archetype. There is another reason the monster persists. Nessie symbolizes what we refuse to accept about ourselves. The Striga in Slavic myth was the neglected child turned beast. The Rusalka was grief incarnate. Nessie, too, is projection. She is the fear of what we cannot explain, the anxiety that something escapes our control. To deny our shadows is to see them return as monsters. The loch becomes a mirror of our inner lives, still on the surface, dark and restless below. But Nessie is not only fear, she is also hope. In an age where every corner of the map has been drawn, every continent explored, every species catalogued, Nessie whispers, "Not everything has been discovered." She represents the possibility that the world still holds secrets. This too reflects our inner lives. Just as the loch may conceal something extraordinary, so too may we. Our depths may not only hide shadows, they may hide treasures. The monster becomes a paradox, both the thing we fear and the mystery we hope for. When people scan Loch Ness with cameras, when they interpret every ripple as a neck, they are projecting their unconscious onto the water. The monster becomes a screen for human psychology. The skeptic sees gullibility. The believer sees mystery. The child sees magic. The entrepreneur sees opportunity. The loch itself remains silent. Nessie is whatever we need her to be. And so Nessie is more than a legend. She is an existential mirror. She shows us how we live with the unknown. Do we deny it, insisting nothing exists beneath the surface? Do we fear it, imagining monsters in every ripple? Or do we honor it, accepting that the unknown is part of life and maybe even necessary? In this sense, the monster inside us is not something to kill or to prove. It is something to acknowledge. Even if tomorrow a definitive study proved once and for all that no large creature lives in Loch Ness, the monster would not die. Because the monster was never really there in the first place. She was always inside us. We will simply move her elsewhere. Another lake, another shadow, another myth, because what Nessie represents cannot be banished. The unconscious is too vast. The need for mystery is too deep. The monster inside us is not our enemy. She is our teacher. She reminds us that life is never fully mapped, that the human psyche is never fully transparent, that we carry depths we cannot control. Nessie is a legend because she is true, not zoologically, but psychologically. She is the shadow we deny, the mystery we need, the hope we carry. And when you stand on the shores of Loch Ness, watching the black water ripple, you are not only looking for her, you are looking for yourself. Stand at the edge of Loch Ness at dusk. The mist drifts low across the water. The surface lies still, and yet your eyes search. You wait for a ripple, a shadow, a sign that something ancient stirs beneath. You know the scientists have searched. You know the photographs have been debunked. You know the DNA tests have found nothing. And still, you hope. That hope is the essence of the Loch Ness Monster. From Saint Columba's tale in the 6th century to the blurry photographs of the 20th, from sonar sweeps to DNA studies, the question has always been the same. Is Nessie real? But perhaps that has never been the right question. The real question is, why does Nessie matter? Because whether or not she exists, she gives us something we cannot live without: mystery. In a world mapped by satellites, measured by science, tracked by algorithms, the Loch Ness Monster is one of the last great symbols of the unknown. She is not only a monster in a lake, she is the reminder that life itself has depths we cannot explain. Myths are not defined by evidence. They are defined by resonance. They endure not because they are proven, but because they are needed. The Greeks had their sea serpents, the Norse their world serpent, the Hebrews their Leviathan. The Scots have Nessie. Each monster serves the same role, to embody what we fear and what we long for in the same form. When you look into Loch Ness, you're not just looking into water. You're looking into the archetypal well of human imagination. The truth is that Nessie has always lived inside us. She is the fear of what lies beneath the surface of our own minds, the grief and longing we cannot articulate, the hope that the world still holds secrets. The monster is our mirror. We created her because we needed her, and we keep her alive because without her, the loch would be just a body of water, and life would be just a surface without depth. And so the legend does not die. Even after hoaxes are exposed, even after science sweeps the loch clean, the ripples return. Someone will see something tomorrow, and the story will begin again. Because myths are not erased by facts. They adapt, they change, they find new forms. Nessie is the eternal ripple, a story that surfaces again and again because the need it fulfills never disappears. The Loch Ness Monster tells us that we cannot live on certainty alone. We need mystery, we need shadows, we need something that resists explanation. Otherwise, life becomes flat, sterile, suffocating. Nessie tells us that the unknown is not only to be feared, it is to be cherished. For in the unknown lies wonder. She also tells us that belief is not always about evidence. Sometimes belief is about meaning. Sometimes we hold on to stories not because they are true, but because they make life richer. And perhaps that is truer than proof. So picture this, the loch at night. The water dark, bottomless, the moonlight catching the mist. Somewhere a ripple breaks the surface. Perhaps it is just a fish. Perhaps it is just a log. Or perhaps it is the monster. You will never know for sure. And that is the point. The Loch Ness Monster endures because she is the question without an answer, the shadow without a body, the ripple without a source. She is the eternal reminder that beneath the surface of the world and beneath the surface of ourselves, something always stirs. The monster does not need to exist in the water. She exists in us. And as long as we continue to search the loch with hope in our eyes, Nessie will never die. Good night.